glucose drain and metabolic challenge, the pathway from high demand to clinical ketose and what reversal strategy. So when you take in meat, when you keep on digesting meats such as cow, sheep and the rest, what will now happen? You know, the end products of proteins are not glucose. So our body is just trying to make this glucose. Now, since our body is trying to make this glucose, but we need carbohydrate food or carbohydrate micronutrients, and you are eating a meat. So our body will now go into another process in order to convert this towards glucose in which we now use. So, and the process by which the body is doing this, we know as we call it what, gluconeogenesis. The process by which our body is doing it, we call it gluconeogenesis, and it will undergo the citric acid cycle in order to convert it to oxaloacetate. Now, since our body is trying to make the use of these proteins in which in the body, it undergo gluconeogenesis, converting non-glucose molecule, carbohydrate molecules towards glucose in which our body can use. So this process, the one of the end products it's usually yield to high amount of what, acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA starts accumulating. If you have studied about the Krebs cycle, or we are going to see it later in our future videos, so it will lead to accumulation of acetyl-CoA. Accumulation of what? Acetyl-CoA. One of the products of gluconeogenesis is most times leads to accumulation of acetyl-CoA, and whenever there is an accumulation of acetyl-CoA, it now leads to ketogenesis surge. And ketogenesis surge is whenever there is high amount of simultaneous increase of production of what, ketone bodies. It now leads to ketogenesis. So acetate is also part of the Krebs cycle. Is what, the acetate, in which our body is trying to make glucose from non-glucose molecule. Remember, we call it what, gluconeogenesis. Now from there, as there is what's called clinical application, whereby we undergo glucose infusion. So we call it glucose infusion. Maybe a patient is dying, and what's happening to that person is we need glucose. We need glucose. So our body, when doctors or medical professionals do something, so they have to inject glucose through the vascular bundles, through the blood vessels. And when they inject glucose, the glucose can now undergo the Krebs cycle to produce what, energy. And remember, the byproduct of the acetyl-CoA is when we are performing, or we are channeling gluconeogenesis in order to make what, glucose. So let's talk about the metabolic convergence and micronutrients to energy. First, when you eat carbohydrates, the byproduct is what, glucose. When you're taking lipids, the byproduct, example of carbohydrates is rice. So when you're taking lipid, maize. So when you're taking lipid, the byproduct is what, fatty acid. Example of lipid are oil, nuts, sometimes meats, and fats and oil. So when you're taking protein, your byproduct is amino acid. So all these things, they will all be converted towards acetyl-CoA. So everything they are doing, they will return back to acetyl-CoA, which will now enter the cell cycle to now undergo so many complex processes to now produce energy. And during this, we call it the oxidative phosphorylation, by which we are adding phosphate group in the presence of what, oxygen, and we now produce what, ATP. So when you take in, that is why during the fasting state, and there is no more carbohydrates in our body to produce this glucose, your body can go ahead and use the lipid in our body. It can also use the proteins in our body to make glucose, because all of them is to end up converting back to acetyl-CoA, and this acetyl-CoA is the major key product of producing glucose. Okay, we have sources of this fatty acid. So when you keep on eating fats, oil, lipids, then meats, sometimes milk, they lead to accumulation of fatty acid. And whenever there is this accumulation of fatty acid, or lipid, it will break them down to fatty acid, and then the villi in the microintestine, which is it is a modified epithelial cell that will start absorbing all these things, all this fatty acid, and as it starts assimilating it, what will happen? So If we have enough glucose, it will esterify it. So what is esterification? Esterification is a process by which you are adding fatty acid together with what glycerol to form triglycerol storage. Now to form triglycerol or triglyceride, and which is stored in the what? In the adipose tissue. They are stored in the adipose tissue. But whenever we are trying to make energy, this fatty acid will now be breaking down by a process of what? The beta oxidation. In where? In the mitochondria. We now convert them to acetyl-CoA. Remember, all their byproducts is what? Acetyl-CoA, 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 fat, lipid, acetyl-CoA, carbohydrates, glucose, acetyl-CoA, and proteins, acetyl-CoA. So all of them, they are just converting into acetyl-CoA because it's the major pathway of producing energy. So what should happen in acetyl-CoA is either we go and produce energy, or we go and produce cholesterol or steroid synthesis depending on what the body needs, or we go and form ketone body formation. So this ketone body formation is what's called ketogenesis. Illustrate the versatile but tightly regulated fate of lipid, carbon for storage or various metabolic applications. Okay, we still under this fed and the fasting stage is the hormonal coordinations ensures continuous ATP supply between the anabolic storage and catabolic metabolization. So what happens during the first state and what happens in the fast state? So in the first state, meaning after breakfast, lunch or dinner, this we call it what? Anabolic storage. Anabolic means we are building up. We are building up. That's what's called anabolic storage. So once in the first state, so we are building up after breakfast, lunch, or dinner. We are building up. So what happens? So when this glucose is enough in our blood, when the glucose is enough in our blood, what's happening? We're going to convert it to glycogen. When this glucose is enough, we're going to convert it to what? Glycogen. And when we convert it to what? To glycogen. Glycogen is the primary storage of glucose whenever they are too much in our body. And this is one of the only polysaccharide found in our body with up to 10 minutes branch. So from glycogen, when more glucose are still coming, this glycogen, we start converting this glycogen to what? To triacylglycerol. And when more are coming, we start undergoing so many processes in our body. So when you keep on eating, it's finally to what? Obesity. So be careful on the way you eat. So we have the hormonal signal connects peripheral tissue and energy storage. So this is what we call the first state. So in the fasting state, what happens in the fasting state? And uninterrupted ATP for vital organs, preventing energy excess and catastrophic defects. So what happens in the fasting state? In the fasting state, we call it what? Catabolic metabolization, or catabolic what? Break it down. We are catabolizing, we are breaking down. Anabolic, we are building up. Catabolic, we are breaking down. And this is when you have not eaten for a very long time, maybe 7 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, you have not eaten. We start undergoing what we call what? Catabolism. If your insulin is functioning properly well, your body will detect that you are lacking glucose and glucagon will be released. But if your insulin is not functioning well, whether you have food or you have glucose in your blood or not, glyconeogenesis starts occurring, and we call this catabolic what? Metabolization. So as you are eating, is digesting, and when you're not eating, glyconeogenesis is occurring. That is the reason why you should thank God. Now we have glycogen. What starts happening? We start breaking down glycogen. We start breaking down glycogen. That's what's going to happen. From there, whenever this glycogen has been completely used up, what's going to happen? We start breaking down triacylglycerol, which will yield about 130 something ATP in our body. Also, whenever this cells has been used up, it will now move over to the protein and starts also breaking down protein. So we have hepatic regulation, metabolize energy, and energy release what? For use. So we in the fasting state, gluconeogenesis occurs. That is what you have to know. You're making glucose from non-glucose molecule. In the feeding state, what's happening? Glycogenesis is occurring as we are producing glycogen, esterification of fatty acid is occurring, and storage of protein molecules is also what's occurring. The Lord is my strength and my shield, my heart trusts in him. So this is all I have for you for this class. But at our main reason why we are teaching you all this is so that you understand the fed versus the fasting state, enzyme regulation, hormonal signaling, nutrient sensing, clinical impact: combating diabetes, addressing obesity, strengthening malnutrition, and empowering clinicians. So the actual frontiers, we have the targeted therapies, we have the restoring metabolic harmony, we have the honoring body design, healthy and long life. So the reason why we are teaching you all this is for you to understand why you should not eat much, why you should eat only when you're hungry, why when you keep on eating, how it will lead towards obesity. So be careful, be careful. The part of healthy life, bridging knowledge towards action. So our aim is to use knowledge and convince you and not to confuse you why you should be careful and conscious of what you eat.